When I was in 5th grade, our school life revolved around celebrations and performances. Fall, winter, spring, there was always some reason to gather the kids in the assembly hall, decorate the stage, and make us sing, dance, or recite poems. To me, it felt like a nightmare. No, worse, a real horror, because I was terribly afraid of the stage. Just thinking about standing in front of everyone made my whole body tense up. My hands got sweaty, butterflies fluttered in my stomach, and even my voice felt weak. I thought, if I open my mouth, I'll forget all the words or start stuttering, and the kids will laugh. But that year, the teacher announced, we're having a big holiday concert. Every class will prepare something, and everyone must participate. Everyone. No exceptions. The girls immediately got excited. They were already sharing which songs they wanted to sing. The boys argued over who would read poems, and I just sat in the corner, wishing I could disappear. But what surprised me most was Nastya. She was my classmate, always smiling, with braids and a voice that could melt ice. She sang better than anyone in school. When she hit a note, even the teachers went silent. And it was Nastya who came up to me after class and said, "You'll go on stage, right?" I blushed and just shook my head. "Why not?" she asked, surprised. "You read so well out loud in class." I shrugged. How could I explain that it's completely different? In class, there are 20 familiar faces. On stage, it's the whole school. Then she smiled even wider and said, "I used to be scared too, but there's a secret." I looked at Nastya in disbelief. Her? Afraid? That was hard to imagine. She always stepped on stage so confidently, with her back straight and eyes shining. "I'm serious," she said softly. In 3rd grade, when they asked me to sing solo for the first time, I was shaking so much I could barely stand. "So what did you do?" I asked. She leaned closer and whispered like she was revealing the biggest secret in the world. I imagined that there was only one person in the audience, and it was my mom. I sang just for her, she shrugged. And that was it. The fear disappeared. I stayed quiet. On one hand, it sounded way too simple. On the other, maybe it was worth a try. Nastya seemed to read my thoughts. "Want to practice together after school?" I hesitated, but her smile was so genuine, I said yes. That same day, we stayed in the classroom. Nastya stood by the window, and I stood by the board. She handed me a sheet with a poem and said, "Okay, now imagine there's just one person here. Who will it be?" I thought of my dad. He always loved listening to me read stories to my little sister. Sometimes he'd even wink at me, like he was saying, "You're doing great." "Dad?" I answered. "Perfect," Nastya nodded. "Now read just for him." I took a deep breath, looked at the page, and began. At first, my voice trembled, but by the second line, I pictured my dad really sitting there, his calm smile, his kind eyes. And suddenly, it felt easier. When I finished, Nastya clapped her hands. "See? You can do it." I couldn't believe it. For the first time in ages, I felt a little spark of hope. Maybe I really could go on stage. But the thought of facing not just Dad, but hundreds of kids and teachers still made my throat tighten. And then Nastya said, "Don't worry. We still have time. I'll be right there with you." A few days passed, and our teacher announced that each class would take turns rehearsing on stage. The assembly hall smelled like fresh paint and wood. The stage, decorated with colorful garlands, looked huge. I sat in the audience with my classmates, and my heart pounded like a drum. When they called our class, my knees felt like jelly. "You've got this," Nastya whispered, nudging me with her elbow. "Just remember, there's only one person in the audience." We walked onto the stage. The lights shone straight into my eyes, and even though the hall was almost empty, It felt endless. My mouth went dry. The teacher gave a small wave. "Begin." Nastya sang first. Her voice filled the room, clear and strong. She sang like she was born for the stage. Even the kids from other classes stopped whispering. Then it was my turn. I had to step forward and recite a poem. I took one step. My hands were shaking. The same thoughts spun in my head. They'll laugh. You'll forget the words. You're going to mess up. I almost stepped back until I saw Nastya in the front row. She was looking right at me, not with judgment, not with fear, but with the same smile she gave me during our practice. I took a deep breath. I pictured my dad, and I began to read. At first, my voice was shaky, but then I focused on the image in my mind. Just one person, sitting quietly, listening, cheering me on. And suddenly, it all felt easier. I finished. A few classmates clapped. The teacher nodded. And I stood there, amazed. I had just performed, on stage, and I survived. But the real challenge was still ahead, the concert day, when the hall would be full. The concert day came faster than I expected. That morning, the whole school buzzed like a beehive. Kids in costumes rushed through the hallways. Some were singing, others nervously repeating their lines. The air smelled like celebration and nerves all at once. My own heart felt like it was beating in my throat. I wanted to run away, hide in the gym, or even pretend to be sick. But my legs took me straight to the assembly hall. The hall was packed. Students, teachers, parents, even the principal sat in the front row. Garlands sparkled, and the lights were even brighter than during rehearsal. We waited behind the curtain. Nastya was fixing her braids and quietly humming her song. I looked at her and wondered, how could she be so calm? "Nervous?" she asked, noticing my face. I just nodded. "Remember? One person, just one. The rest don't exist," she smiled. And then they announced our class. We stepped onto the stage. The lights hit my eyes, and the room fell silent. Nastya stepped forward and began to sing. Her voice rang out so clearly, I forgot my fear for a moment. Every eye in the room was on her. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward. Hundreds of eyes stared back. Some kids in the back whispered. I felt like the floor beneath me shifted. I took a breath. I imagined my dad sitting in the audience. Just him, no one else. "I love the bright, ringing spring," I began. My voice trembled, but with each line, I found my rhythm. I pictured my dad's smile in my mind. I felt Nastya's support beside me. And slowly, the fear started to fade. I finished the poem. The hall was silent. Then, applause. Real, loud, genuine applause. I stood there, overwhelmed, but happy. It felt like a dream. But the most important moment came after the concert. After the concert, we went back to our classroom. The kids were laughing, sharing their feelings. Some were praising Nastya for her song. Others were talking about how their moms filmed everything on camera. I sat at my desk, still not quite believing it was all over. Inside, I felt something strange. Not lightness, but not fear either. More like calm. Then Nastya came up to me. "See? I told you you could do it," she said, her eyes glowing with pride like she had stood in my place herself. I wanted to thank her, but just then another classmate, Olia, came up to me. "You were so brave today," she said quietly. "I'm also really scared to perform. But when I watched you, I thought, maybe one day I can do it too." I was stunned. I never imagined anyone would look up to me, the kid who always tried to hide from the stage. Later, on my way home, I felt like something inside me had changed. I walked down the street, watching the trees sway in the wind. And I thought, the fear didn't disappear, it's still there somewhere. But now I know I can handle it. I imagined how tomorrow I'd tell my dad that I performed, and how he'd probably smile and wink, like always. And I knew one more thing for sure. Without Nastya, I never would have done it. Many years have passed. I'm no longer that boy with shaking hands who was afraid to take a step forward. In my life, there have been many stages. Some big, some small. And every time I stood in front of people, that same fear would wake up in my chest. But you know what? I'm not afraid of it anymore. I've learned that fear is part of the journey. It will always be there. But it can't stop you if you take just one step forward. I often think of Nastya, her smile, her simple advice. Imagine you're performing for just one person. And I still use that secret. Sometimes I imagine my dad sitting there. Sometimes it's one of my kids. And suddenly, it feels easier. I also remember that moment after the concert when Olya came up to me and said she was inspired by my performance. And I realized, sometimes our courage matters not just for us. It can be a light for someone else. So if you, dear listener, ever feel scared to step up, don't run away. Take a step, read your line, sing your song, even if your heart is racing. Because courage isn't about not being scared. Courage is when you are scared, but you step forward anyway. Believe in yourself, and remember, your voice might be the example someone else needs. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.